Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, boys and girls, Canadian cinema is taking on so many different and exciting forms that, quite frankly, we cannot get enough of it. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of entertainment industry professionals, and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more, in a light and in a conversational fashion. And you know, if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because let's face it, you're listening right now. Subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Give us the old 5-star rating on your podcast platform of choice. And subscribe. We're pretty much everywhere. We're over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, and plus we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, do not hesitate to follow us on social media. We're on the Facebook, we're on the Twitter, we're on the Instagram, we're on the TikTok, and we're on the Letterboxd at In the Seats for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because, you know, if we love to write about it and talk about it, well, quite frankly, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please, pay us a visit. On this episode, oh my goodness, we are talking more Canadian cinema with a film that played TIFF, but is also coming back to the Lightbox this Friday for a run. And it's from writer-director Ashley McKenzie, who quite frankly is one of probably our most up-and-coming talents who we have here in Canada for telling some really dynamic and fascinating stories. And the film is called Queens of the Qing Dynasty. And it's the story of a suicidal teen who develops a rapport with a student from Shanghai who is assigned to watch her in the hospital. And after a nightly exchange of secrets, text messages, and, you know, just go back and forth, we really get an interesting look at sort of how the boundaries of this relationship get pushed and taken to some pretty interesting ways as both these characters find themselves at a crossroads, which, quite frankly, I don't think anybody it would have expected when we went into the start of this film. It's a really fascinating character piece from Ashley McKenzie, who has done, again, some fantastic work, who, if you're following the Festival Canadian scene, like she did Werewolf back in 2016, and between you and me, she is, quite frankly, a really fantastic talent who comes from the East Coast, but is making, you know, what I think is truly the new definition of Canadian cinema, because they're dynamic, they're multicultural, and they're really telling these personable stories of people who find themselves drawn to one another, but also they don't know why. And I mean, again, I don't think I can stress enough how fascinating these are as character studies. And I mean, I think she's a fantastic filmmaker. And if you haven't already figured it out, we had the unique chance of sitting down with Ashley to talk about sort of the origins of the story and making the film, and so very much more, for a fantastic conversation that we had. But first, you know, if please make plans, if you're in Toronto, to go see Queens of the Qing Dynasty over at the TIFF Bell Lightbox. I'm pretty sure Ashley is going to be there for some Q&A as well. But if you want a preview of that, check out the conversation we had. We were lucky enough to have a couple of weeks ago, because between you and me, it is a darn good one. All right, now, I mean, just to kick it off officially, just really thank you so much for the time today, and congratulations on the film. I absolutely loved it.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, it's great to chat, and thanks for engaging with it.
Now, I mean, walk me through the origin of the story on your end.
Well, it kind of started with my first feature, actually, in the audition room for Werewolf. I met two young women, teenagers at the time, who I was really intrigued by and really interested to cast in the lead role of Werewolf. And in each case, for various reasons, it didn't work for that film, but I connected with both of these teenagers, pretty closely, and I think they were each kind of looking for a friend, a support in their life. And I just felt like very quickly I started to have a lot of experiences that are similar to what you see happen between Star and On in the film. And one of those teenagers in particular became a friend. And I am just endlessly intrigued by the way she speaks and the way she sees the world. And like anytime I speak with her, spend a second with her, I just feel like my mind shifts in a different direction. That is
Okay.
so exciting. And the way she speaks to me felt like poetry. So very quickly, although I like knew that, you know, I had tried to figure out a way to make a film with her and cast her in a film, and it wasn't quite working out. And I had to let go of that. I just could not get her voice out of my head. And so I found myself starting to write scenes that were flowing and fun and just had a different vibe than my past work. And that became kind of the genesis of the character of Star. And then the genesis of the character of Anne sort of happened in as the landscape here in Cape Breton Island started to shift for the first time with a lot of new immigrants and a lot of young people coming to the island, because historically young people leave the island to find work.
Right.
So there's this shift happening that in my lifetime I hadn't seen, and also I was like paying attention to and excited about. And the actor Zian, who plays On, was one of these people that moved to the island to go to university and with hopes of becoming a permanent resident and then a citizen eventually of Canada. They connected with me, and similarly, we started to have conversations that also were very stimulating and impactful. And they actually told me that they wanted to play a sassy bitch in one of my films. And just, you know, I kind of like have a slow burn development process, artistic process. And just over a period of years of writing the film, I like decided at a certain point to try to write the other character in the film for them. And in doing so, like integrated a lot of their personal experiences into the work. And they were kind of a creative consultant while I did that. So it was really these two people in my life that I think are really interesting and had these very deep conversations with. It was very conversational, and the film was like these two dialogues that I was having, and I sort of put the two of them together and pulled myself out of the picture, and that sort of became what this character piece, relationship piece is all about.
Well, I love that because I mean, in watching the film, I mean, I was kind of struck by the fact that while there are very serious things that are going on in both Star's and in Anne's life, this isn't necessarily a downer movie. Like there's sort of an underlying happiness to sort of this very complex relationship that we're seeing unfold. And I mean, for you, how important was it to sort of convey this story in a way that, I mean, it's just life. Like, it's not bad, it's not good, it's not romance, it's not like there's so many different layers to it. Like, when you were putting this together, how big was it for you to sort of really tell this story in a way that was not trying to lean into a certain convention?
I'm happy to hear that that's the tone that you received, because I think that was what was like really fueling me at the time, was this feeling that these two people aren't miserable. And like, I do come from a place and even I would say a tradition of cinema that is so realist heavy that, you know, it can be seen as a little bit too dark and miserable for a lot of people. And like those social conditions still exist here, but I was so refreshed as a person, and I was so ready at this point in my life to see things in a different way, that the resiliency and creativity of both Star and On, and the people that, you know, I was inspired by in my life, if in terms of each of those characters, was just like an energy and a creativeness that I needed that, and I needed that energy, and that is what like excited me about writing and excited me about the energy of the piece and the tone. And so I just wanted to honor that as much as possible and capture them as in that part of them as much as possible. And so I did feel like I had to actually let go of some of the conventions that, I felt like I had in my own cinema as like a social realist filmmaker. I was like, oh, these characters do not fit into this like mold at all. They really like burst out of that so much, and they felt like they had more agency. And so I felt like I was responding to them a lot, and I was like, oh, I got to expand the boundaries of this world right now. I need to let them push outside of these boxes that they're in, because so much in, say, like a social realist film, you can feel the hand of the filmmaker or the determinist
Right.
impulse of like, these characters are pawns and things aren't going to work out well for them. And to me, like, I relate to so much of that, and and have really adored films that do have that vibe, because there's a real honesty and harsh honesty in there, but it just felt like these two characters demanded something else. And so I just tried to listen, and like whatever the form took, I just tried to let it go there, even if it felt like, outside of what I've done in the past and maybe a little unconventional. I just wanted to give them space to like exist fully, and I went along for the ride.
Well, I mean, I guess that dovetails into my next question. Like, how did you find sort of ultimately like narrow it down to these two fantastic actors who really give some fantastic performances? Because I mean, I think like you said, if there had been too much sort of over direction, as it were, like it would have come across that way, but it didn't, and it felt very natural. Like, how did you find the right actors that you could trust with these characters?
Yeah, it was tricky because the character of Star was so closely inspired by this friend of mine. I was afraid that because I couldn't cast her, um, I was afraid that no matter how another actor performed it, I was just going to be so tied to, how I heard them in my head and saw them, their mannerisms for years, sort of in building the script. And I just did a general casting call in my community, and, saw some tapes from other actors across the country. But Sarah Walker, who plays Star, she was actually the second person to walk into the audition room. On paper and her photo, like, seemed so unlike Star. Like, it just seemed sort of like, she had like a Cape Breton tartan blonde hair, like shawl on. I was just like, this is not Star. But then when she did the read, there was something about her tone and affect that was very much like my friend, and I was really like startled by it. And so I kept calling her back, and as I got to know her a bit, and I couldn't quite understand where she was pulling this, these details from, or just because it just seemed unlike what I was perceiving her to be. I learned that she was like a dancer, and like she studies voice, a beautiful singer, and like and then as I went on in the process and decided to cast her, and I connected her and my friend, and they, spent time together, and I learned very quickly that she was, one, obviously had some connection to the character that was just innate, but then also she was able to use her voice and her body in such like a precise instrument kind of way that she was able to channel this what was written in the script and what she knew of my friend in a way that was just really like incredible and exciting. So once she started to do her work on set, like, I really did just get out of the way and didn't tamper with it, because she just dialed it in really perfectly. And with Zian and Jun, because the character was, partly based on them, it was just a matter of, and I really felt like, because I, wrote with them in mind and consulted them heavily in the writing process, I was just crossing my fingers that when it came time for me to do some screen tests with them and auditions, because I should say neither Sarah Walker or Zian have ever been in a film before. So I was really hoping that when I did those tests and those auditions that they would go well, because I was like, I don't think I can cast anyone but Zian. And fortunately they did. And with them, they didn't have like quite as like an extensive background, say in theater or something like
Right.
Sarah Walker did. but they knew the material in their mind and their heart. They're a very deep thinker, very like imaginative, interesting person. So at times when maybe like the mechanics of filmmaking, maybe you could tell we're cramping their style or like making them a bit not relaxed, I would
Right.
just tell them that they could go off script and just encourage them to be themselves and to say things in their own way, knowing that like it would probably fall in line with, the main points we were trying to hit anyways. And usually that was like the thing that helped them sink into just this more natural, like grounded, energized place and not get caught up in all the weird things that you need to deal with when you're an actor and there's people all around you
But I mean,
touching your hair and stuff.
yeah, it was such a unique dynamic between the two because I mean, you got this sense of ease but unease at the same time. And I mean, I can imagine you didn't necessarily get a lot of rehearsal time on this. I mean, it's a Canadian independent shoot. I imagine you probably had to be pretty run and gun with it once you
Yeah,
started.
we didn't have much rehearsal time, but we did shoot a lot of footage. So that's, that the hard work was that the massive amount of footage just had to be dug through, but it gave us the opportunity to really like capture a lot in a shorter period of time and run two cameras and just, give the actors as many opportunities to do some different things and get in a zone we still shot 32 days, which for a Canadian independent is like, at least on the East Coast here, a lot of features might only shoot 15 days or something. So we shot a lot of days because it was a big script. It was like twice as long as my first feature. So we had time to shoot, but we didn't have that rehearsal time. And yeah, I credit it to them for bringing, that sort of chemistry, and then just mining the edit myself and my co-editor Scott, who was also the DP on the film. We just really mined the material and tried to excavate as much as we could in terms of like little weird idiosyncrasies and little gems.
No, I mean, that's curious though, because I mean, you are right though, because I mean, Werewolf did have a certain degree of immediacy to it, whereas this kind of allows moments to breathe. Like, was that a conscious choice on your end to try to be more? I mean, I don't want to say intellectual. I'm looking for the right word here, but I mean, I definitely felt on this film that not just with the characters and emotionally, but even from a visual standpoint, it felt like we were getting a chance to sort of sit in the moment more than we were maybe on Werewolf.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that as well, because that was like one of the big things I was trying to move towards when I was making the film. And again, it was, Werewolf, I think that's the style it has, which I would say is like elliptical,
Yeah.
and lean, worked well. And I think just creatively I came out of that feeling like I wanted something different, and two, that maybe I was like, maybe that I was hiding behind the ellipses or something, which was like, I had, I was listening to a podcast with the author Rachel Cusk, and she referred to ellipses as like the meaning of that word is to hide behind silence. And I felt like that really related to that. And I felt like with Werewolf and with some of my past films, like I was afraid, one, like these short scenes that just kind of like, these little snippets, you can hide a lot by just, giving the bare minimum and moving on to the next thing. And it is like this different pacing. But I feel like you can avoid a kind of discomfort by cutting out of a scene quickly. And also I felt like I was hiding a bit behind silence in terms of being afraid to really embrace dialogue. Not that I felt like I needed dialogue, but the characters as they appeared on the page had a lot to say. And so I felt like I had to enter new terrain and let them really speak, which to me was like, again, not part of like my filmmaking style so much. So both of those things were like very much a rhythmic and depth difference, in that I wanted the scenes to like, find a certain truth, but then rather than cut away, stay in the scene, let it pivot and move through a moment of discomfort and let it pivot into a new direction and continue the scene. So basically build longer scenes, move through some uncomfortable moments and like not hide behind cuts and lack of speaking. Having really taciturn kind of reticent characters. I didn't want to hide behind those things, so that I
No,
think
for sure. But I mean, the film has such a humanistic quality to it because I mean, granted, at its core, these two characters are living just. I mean, I don't want to say on the outskirts, but I mean, just sort of the outside, just like that, just that edge outside of the box of what people expect of them. And it makes for such a dynamic as we see them get to know each other and interact. It boils down to such a humanistic quality of something that we kind of tend to forget even in sort of day-to-day action interactions with sort of people in general. Like we treat people as expectations, we don't treat them as people. And I mean, I think this film really kind of highlights the need to sort of have people together in a really interesting way. And I mean, for you, like in putting this together, because this isn't the film that is trying, like, to me anyway, it's not trying to make any sort of political statement or any sort of gender specific statement or any or sort of orientation statement. It's coming down to sort of the humanity of it all. Like, for you as a storyteller, at the end of the day, is that what draws you into wanting to tell a story? Because I mean, granted, there can be message filmmakers and message storytellers and the whole nine yards, but isn't, at the end of the day, for you, is it about finding sort of these people and telling something that centers around them rather than trying to, I guess, hammer something else onto an audience?
That's so much what it is for me, actually. And I need to record that, and when people ask me in the future why I make films, that is what I will say.
When I send the link, you can have it. Trust me. You have my verbal permission to save the clip. That's absolutely fine.
And yeah, especially with Queens of the Qing Dynasty, I think like I had on my mind a lot like this idea of dimensionality was a word that my cinematographer Scott and I would use. And again, it was like I was wanting to, like, when we were starting to think about like what lenses we wanted to use and what angles and how much we wanted to, show the room or show how we wanted to capture in the performers' faces. It was like the word dimensionality came to mind, and so much of the writing of the film very much was about wanting to like show the many dimensions of each of these people. And like the whole film is really like just trying to explore that via very various different modes, and just like peeling away the layers. And I mean, I think that's what really drives the narrative and the aesthetics, and like every aspect of it is about just trying to show like how these humans are so complex and how they're often reduced to less complex versions and perceptions of who they are, and labeled in certain ways, and categorized, institutionalized, and all these certain things. So that is what drives me. And like I think as a person is, I think humans are amazing, and I'm endlessly curious about them and inspired by them. So when I meet like amazing people in my life, in my community, it is really exciting to want to try to build a really rich like portrait of someone like them, and bring that to the screen. And I hope that Star and On do sort of feel different and vibrate differently and stick with the audience when they leave the theater too. Like I'm hoping that depth and dimensionality really like leaves a mark.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that comes through, especially in sort of that two shot of them in the restaurant scene where there's the red overtones, and it feels a lot more warm versus sort of the hospital, which is this cold and white and gray. And I mean, especially the use of music as well, it really allows us to sort of create a division between sort of where they want to be or where they should be versus sort of the boxes where they are. And I mean, Can you talk a little bit just about sort of the choice of music? Because I mean, I really enjoyed sort of the some of the electronic choices, because it really felt like you were trying to again put us in a world where these people truly exist, which is obviously in our world, but just slightly out of sync with it.
Hmm. Yeah, I did want it to feel like an alternate world and like almost like slightly like a sci-fi world in some ways. Like, you know, Emily Dickinson says, "Tell the truth, but tell it slant." Like I remember being like,
Exactly. Yeah.
this needs to be a slightly slanted world, slanted towards like sci-fi a little bit, which I don't know, sometimes, you know, being in a small community, living on an island, you do feel like you're in an alternate universe. And I think that these characters feel like that at times. And yeah, and so much of the music was like trying to have like a continuity of palette with the electronic music, but then diverging from that in different ways to like say like Star's character I think has a certain musicality that is, you know, more embodied by some of the tracks by like Autechre and Cecile Believe, who, you know, there was some licensed and original music in there that is like kind of more like has this glitch aspect. And to me, Star very much is like a little bit of kind of like a glitch character. She really goes into like normative situations and subverts them and like, you know, kind of throws a wrench in the script a bit. But in a way that to me is like really vital and like really it's really worth paying attention to that to see, you know, what is being generated and what she's saying and what can be created out of that. And with on like some of the music, like, you know, they're referencing and singing of like traditional Chinese songs, Celine Dion,
Yeah.
and original tracks by Yusu, who's an electronic music who spent, you know, the majority of her early life like growing up in China and being classically trained as a musician, but then moved to Vancouver and got into like house music and is now like, you know, working in the electronic palette too. They brought like again a continuity to those sounds, but then more like history and connection to like some of the Chinese mythology that On is connected to, and a bit more melody and pop music and something a bit more yeah, poppy, I guess.
Yeah.
And and yeah, so I felt like each character kind of had their own musicality, and then it was like I guess as you sort of mentioned in referencing say the journey from being in the hospital to like, you know, the restaurant at the end, it was sort of like in some ways like dueling or dissonant sounds and a soundscape, and it was trying to figure out how like to remedy that, or what the, you know, one of the last songs is called Elixir because it was kind of like, yeah, what is going to be the elixir to this like
Right.
situation. So I think there's definitely like there's a journey, a full journey, I think, in the soundscaping of the film and in the music.
No, I mean, just to put a bow on this, in watching like not only this film, but I mean Werewolf too, I really feel like these are films that are kind of redefining the definition of Canadian cinema, because when you know, talk to maybe a layman on the street and you say, oh, there's a filmmaker from Nova Scotia and she's telling a story in Cape Breton, in their minds, that's going to be a very different movie than the stories that you're telling.
Hmm.
But I'm kind of curious, how has the landscape of Canadian cinema changed from your perspective? Because I mean, I look at the great stuff you're doing, and even like stuff from Toronto, stuff in Vancouver, it really feels like Canadian cinema has gotten to a point where it is very international. Like we can almost label Canadian cinema like we would Korean cinema or French cinema or that kind of thing. It's really starting to round out into its own shape. And I was curious on your perspective on that.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that you see it that way, and yeah, it's exciting to think that it is um maybe collectively, yeah, emerged enough to tangibly feel that way in the international scene. I think that's incredible. And yeah, I do feel like I'm part of like a, you know, spectrum of filmmakers and, you know, that have been operating probably for, you know, decades really, and
Hmm.
in different pockets of vast landscape that we're all in. But certainly I think that there's more acceptance now. I would say there beginning to be more acceptance with funders and on the institutional level that, you know, recognizing and supporting different modes of cinema. I think that that's worthwhile, and that I think by, you know, expanding the modes in which, you know, we make films, the ways we make them, the more we embrace that, the more we're going to get, you know, different types of stories, different forms of films, and just more interesting work. And I think if we just really try to teach and pass down the industrial mode, it just, to me, excludes so many filmmakers that aren't in a context, whether it's with resources, personnel, you know, so many cultural differences, so many different things that don't fit into the industry mode. And so if that's the only way you tell people they can make films, I think you're only going to get a certain type of film. And I think that's slowly being broken down a bit. Say, like, you know, when Telefilm had their talent to watch projects, their micro budget films, like, you know, that was, I think, a small step that had a huge impact into maybe helping what was already there. There's always pockets of filmmakers finding ways and processes to make films, you know, in different places, like without that can't do it in the industry way. They've always been there, but I think maybe there has been a few changes that's allowed a bit of a like flood of these types of films, and like an excitement and a learning. Everyone's watching what everyone else is doing and taking note and getting excited and inspired. So I think that's just starting to change. I really want it to change more, because I think that there's even more storytellers out there that aren't like getting a good chance at like really making a film, because making films is just so convoluted and expensive, and the logistics of it are just like so next level compared to other art forms, that I think it's going to take like as much, you know, cooperation and shifting, I think, of funding policies and you know, just so many different like little factors, I think, need to continue to shift to keep allowing people to figure out new and creative adaptable ways to make films, because it's really like such a wild thing to pull off, I think.
Oh, well, God, yeah. But I mean, I think in many ways we've really managed to subvert the expectation of what Canadian content or what Canadian cinema is, because I mean, again, like I said, with the layman, they think, oh, it's a story from the East Coast, it's the Beachcombers. Oh, it's a story from, you know, Saskatoon, it's Corner Gas.
Yeah.
But, you know, no, it's the Jean-Marc Vallée's, it's the Denis Villeneuve's, it's the Adam McGoyans, it's the David Cronenberg's, it's and so many more different filmmakers, much like yourself, who are putting out sort of this fantastic content, which is really starting to get acknowledgement on the global stage. And I mean, to me, that makes me so unbelievably happy that, you know, I'm kind of hopeful for the future, even in this day and age of sort of streaming and content, which we're all going a little blind with, that there is hope for the cream to rise to the top still.
Yeah. Well, I'm hopeful too. And it is a big ecosystem, you know. It's like people like yourself, it's the filmmakers, it's the programmers, it's like,
Yeah.
it's everyone plays a huge part in something like this emerging and becoming like a thing that we can all like grasp. It is like such a cooperative effort. So yeah, I hope that we keep all hope the organism keeps growing and becoming more interesting.
Well, I mean, I think you're contributing to that, especially when this opens in a couple of weeks, but I can't wait for more people to see it. But again, just thank you so much for the time, and congrats on the work. Keep it up.
Thank you.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and and Blu-ray needs.